The call came at 9:47 on Christmas morning. I know the exact time because I was standing in my sister's kitchen, still in my coat, holding a casserole dish that burned through my oven mitts. And I just looked at the clock, because I was running 20 minutes late, and my mother had already texted me 3 times about it. My phone lit up on the counter and I saw the name. Lily. My daughter was calling me on Christmas morning, which she never did, because we'd agreed 2 weeks earlier that she'd spend the holiday with her father and I'd drive up on the 26th. So when I saw her name, I felt the particular cold that has nothing to do with temperature. I set the casserole down and answered. She didn't say Merry Christmas. She didn't say anything for a full 4 seconds. Then she said very quietly, "Mom, I'm at home." I said, "I know, baby, you're at Dad's." She said, "No, I mean our home. Your house. I've been here since yesterday." I looked at the casserole. I looked at the clock. I looked at 23 members of my family seated 20 feet away in my sister's dining room, around a table with centerpieces my mother had spent 4 days arranging, beside a Christmas tree decorated with ornaments from my grandmother's estate that my sister had won in the settlement. And I thought, I am going to have to explain something today that I've been avoiding for 3 years. My daughter was 11 years old, and she'd spent Christmas Eve alone, in an empty house, because the people in that dining room had made it impossible for her to be anywhere else. This is that story. I need you to understand something about my family before I explain what happened to Lily, because without the context, the story sounds like a mistake. A miscommunication, a tragedy you could have prevented with one more phone call. It wasn't a mistake. It was the inevitable result of 11 years of choices my family made about who counted and who didn't, and my daughter had the specific misfortune of being born on the wrong side of that line. My name is Carol. I'm 44 years old. I'm a physical therapist with a practice in Columbus, Ohio, and I have a daughter named Lily who has her father's brown eyes and my mother's stubbornness, and the kind of laugh that fills a room so completely you forget what silence sounded like. Lily is 11 now. When this story starts, she was 8. I was married to Derek for 9 years. We met in graduate school, got married at 28, bought a house in a suburb called Westfield that had good schools and a park 2 blocks over, where Lily learned to ride a bike on a Tuesday in April when she was 4 years old. Derek was not a bad man. I want to say that clearly because the story requires it. He was a distracted man, a man who loved his daughter in the scattered, poorly expressed way of someone who was never taught how, and when the marriage ended it was not dramatic. It was just finished. The way a book is finished when you reach the last page and realize you stopped caring about the characters 50 pages before the ending but kept reading anyway. Because you'd already invested so much. We divorced when Lily was 5. The custody arrangement was civil, almost aggressively civil, the kind of civil that's more about exhaustion than goodwill. We split the year in half with modifications around the holidays. Lily spent Christmas with me on even years and with Derek on odd years. She spent Thanksgiving with Derek's family and Easter with mine. It was the kind of schedule that sounds reasonable on paper and requires the cooperation of people who are actually willing to be reasonable to maintain. Derek's family was reasonable. Mine was a different matter entirely. My family has a center of gravity and her name is my sister, Patricia. Patricia is 3 years older than me, blonde in the aggressive way of someone who hasn't seen her natural color since 1998, married to a man named Brent who sells insurance and laughs too loud at his own jokes. Patricia has 2 children, twins named Connor and Chloe, who were born 6 months before Lily, and who have functioned for their entire lives as the correct version of a grandchild that my daughter has always been the imperfect comparison to. This is not something my family would ever say out loud. It is something they have communicated fluently and without interruption for 11 years. Connor plays travel baseball. Chloe does competitive dance. Both of them have their pictures on my mother's refrigerator, a state of the art stainless steel appliance my parents bought 2 years ago that has a photo display panel on the front door. Lily's picture is not on it. I checked, the last time I was there, the way you check a wound you already know is infected. 14 photos of Connor and Chloe. 0 of Lily. My mother, Sandra, is the kind of woman who would tell you she loves all her grandchildren equally, and believe it completely while she said it. Which is the most dangerous kind of untruth, because it doesn't know it's lying. She is warm and generous, and she bakes from scratch, and she organized the church fundraiser for 17 consecutive years, and she has never once in my memory done a thing she understood to be cruel. She has done cruel things constantly. She just reframed them as preferences, as logistics, as what made sense given the circumstances. Patricia's kids are here more often, so naturally they're in more photos. Patricia lives 10 minutes away, so naturally holiday planning happens around her schedule. Patricia's family is bigger, so naturally the house arrangements favor them. Naturally, is. Everything in my mother's world happens naturally, and nothing is ever a choice. The first Christmas after the divorce, I drove Lily 40 minutes to my parents' house in Delaware, Ohio. And she sat at the children's table with Connor and Chloe, and 2 cousins from my father's side, all of whom were between 6 and 8 years old, all of whom got along except for the part where Connor told Lily that her dad wasn't there because her family was broken. He was 6. He heard it somewhere. I know that. But I watched my sister hear it from across the room and press her lips together and say nothing. And I understood then that the children's table was not a neutral location. By the time Lily was 7, the shape of things had clarified. Patricia's children got birthday parties at my parents' house, with invitations and decorations, and the good cake from the bakery on Main Street. Lily got a card. Connor had a baseball game. My father rearranged a fishing trip to attend. Lily had a school play where she had 12 lines and played the lead, and my parents arrived late and left during the reception because my mother had a thing the next morning. Patricia's children were mentioned in my parents' Christmas card with a photograph. Lily was not. When I pointed this out to my mother, she said she hadn't had a recent photo of Lily and she'd meant to ask and she was sorry. The following year the card had 5 photos of Connor and Chloe and 1 photo of my parents' dog. I'm not telling you this to build a case. I'm telling you this because you need to understand that, by the time Lily was 8 years old, she already understood, in the way children understand things before they have the words for it, that she was not the family's priority. She was its inconvenience. The Christmas I'm telling you about was an odd year, which meant Lily was supposed to spend it with Derek. His family did Christmas big, a house in Cincinnati, both sets of grandparents, cousins, a real tree. Is the kind of holiday my daughter genuinely loved, because Derek's mother Helen was the type of grandmother who made stockings with names embroidered on them and put a gift under the tree for Lily, even when she wasn't there, just so it was waiting when she arrived. Lily had been looking forward to Cincinnati since November. She'd told me what she was getting Helen for Christmas. A ceramic mug with a photo of the 2 of them on it, and she'd wrapped it herself with too much tape the way she always wrapped things and put it in her backpack 2 weeks early so she wouldn't forget. I dropped her at Derek's apartment on the evening of December 23rd. He had her suitcase, the one with the small llama patch she'd ironed on herself. He had her backpack with the mug in it. He had the whole arrangement confirmed. Cincinnati the next morning, back on the 27th. I hugged her in the parking lot, and she smelled like the strawberry shampoo she'd been using since she was 5. And I said, "Have the best Christmas, baby." And she said, "You too, Mom." And she waved from the 2nd floor landing as I backed out, and I didn't know, pulling onto the road, that she'd be back in my empty house by midnight. What happened was this. Derek got a call that evening from a woman named Stephanie, who was 31 and a dental hygienist, and had been in Derek's life for 4 months, in the way things are in a person's life, before they're ready to announce them. Stephanie had a family Christmas in Nashville. She wanted Derek there. She'd been patient about the logistics, about the custody calendar, about the way Derek's life had the structural complexity of someone who'd been a husband and was still figuring out how to be an ex-husband. And on the evening of December 23rd, standing in his apartment with his daughter's suitcase by the door, Derek looked at everything he wanted and made the calculation that divorced fathers with guilty consciences make, and told himself Lily would understand. He called Helen and said there'd been a change of plans. Helen said if he wasn't coming, she wasn't driving up to get Lily alone. He called me at 11 that night. I didn't answer. I was already asleep. He texted instead. Can Lily stay at your place? Something came up with the Cincinnati trip. I'll explain later. Everything fine. Just need you to take her back tonight if possible. I didn't see the text until morning because I sleep with my phone on silent. Lily had already texted me at 11:15 from Derek's apartment. Dad said we're not going to Grandma Helen's. He said I should go to your house. I have my key. Is that okay? I didn't answer either because I was asleep with my phone on silent, which means my 8-year-old daughter let herself into my house at 11:30 on Christmas Eve with her own key, dragged her suitcase up the stairs, put herself to bed, and woke up alone on Christmas morning in a house where there was no tree, because the tree was at my parents' house 3 days early. No stocking because the stocking was at my parents' house. No food that wasn't crackers and peanut butter, because I'd cleaned out the perishables before leaving. And no mother, because the mother was 20 miles away in a house full of family, asleep, with her phone on silent. She'd been there since midnight. She'd found some crackers. She'd watched television by herself. She'd made herself a glass of water, and sat on the couch in the dark on Christmas morning, and waited until nearly 10 o'clock before she called me. Because Lily, who was 8 years old and had more dignity than every adult in her life combined, had not wanted to be a burden. She told me that later. She'd thought about calling sooner, but she didn't want to interrupt Christmas. She didn't want to be the problem. She'd sat alone in my empty house for 10 hours on Christmas morning, because she was afraid of being inconvenient. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because that fear does not arrive in an 8-year-old on its own. It is installed, slowly. By years of being treated as an interruption, I left my sister's house in 11 minutes. I didn't announce it. I put on my coat and picked up my keys, and my mother said, "The food isn't even on the table yet." And I said, "I have to go get Lily." And Patricia said, "What happened?" And I said, "Her father left her alone." Which was true and not the whole truth, and also not the part I was prepared to discuss in a foyer full of people wearing Christmas sweaters. I drove the 20 miles in 18 minutes, and I walked into my house, and Lily was on the couch in her pajamas with a blanket and a bowl of crackers, and the television on low. And she looked up at me with those brown eyes, and she didn't cry. She just said, "Hey, Mom," like I'd come home from the grocery store. That was the moment I understood how much practice she'd had at not making her feelings into other people's emergencies. I sat down next to her. I pulled her into my side. I said, "I'm so sorry I didn't answer." She said, "It's okay." She said it the way children say things they've been told to say, not because it was okay, but because okay was the version that required the least from everyone. I held her for a long time, and I didn't say anything else, because there wasn't anything else to say. Not yet. Not to her. I had quite a lot to say to other people. Just not yet. I brought her back to my parents' house. I want to be clear that I debated this. The option of staying home, ordering pizza, watching movies, giving Lily a Christmas that was small but fully ours. That option existed. I considered it for the 20 minutes I spent making her toast and hot chocolate and helping her change into clothes. I chose to go back because I needed my family to see her. Not as a performance, not as a statement, but because I was 41 years old and I'd spent 11 years allowing my daughter to be invisible to people who were supposed to love her, and I was no longer willing to be the person who made that easier by keeping her out of the room. We arrived at 1. The food was on the table. My mother hugged Lily with the warm efficiency of someone performing affection they believe they feel. Patricia said, "Oh, what happened with Derek?" in the tone of someone who wants the story, but not the complication. Lily was seated next to Chloe, who ignored her with the committed thoroughness of an 11-year-old who has absorbed without instruction the hierarchy of her household. Connor showed her a video game for 4 minutes and then went back to his cousins. Lily sat at the children's table and ate her food and said please and thank you and did not complain. And I sat at the adult table and watched my family move around her like water around a small stone, present but untouched, and I thought, I have let this go on too long. The gifts were what broke me. My parents had gifts for Connor and Chloe under the tree. Real gifts, research gifts. A telescope for Connor, who'd said in September that he liked astronomy. A sewing machine for Chloe, who'd been interested in design. They'd been listening to those children all year. They had a gift for Lily too, wrapped in the same paper as the others, placed under the tree beside the ones with her cousins' names on them. And for one moment I thought, they got it right this time. Lily opened it. It was a $50 gift card to a bookstore, which was fine, genuinely fine, except that last Christmas it had been a gift card to a different store. And the Christmas before that a gift card to yet another. And I realized, as I watched her hold the little envelope, that my parents did not know what Lily liked. They had never asked. The gift card was not a gift. It was a placeholder shaped like one. A way of checking the box that said, I acknowledged this child at Christmas without requiring that you know anything about her. Lily said thank you. She said it clearly and she meant it, because Lily has always had more grace than the people who raised her mother. But I saw her put the envelope in her pocket with the particular carefulness of someone who's learned not to show disappointment in public. And I excused myself to the kitchen and stood at the sink with the water running and pressed my palms flat against the counter and breathed. It was my Aunt Connie who found me there. Connie is my mother's older sister, a retired school teacher from Dayton with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the specific authority of a woman who has spent 40 years deciding what is and is not acceptable behavior in rooms full of people who would rather avoid the topic. She stood beside me at the sink and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, Your mother means well. I said, I know. She said, That doesn't mean she's doing well. I looked at her. She was watching Lily through the kitchen doorway, who was now sitting alone at the children's table while the cousins had migrated to the living room, eating the last of her cranberry sauce with the focused attention of a child who has decided that the food in front of her is more reliable than the people around her. Connie said, How long has this been going on? And I told her. I told her everything. The refrigerator photos, the play they left early, the birthday cards, the gift cards 3 years in a row. The Christmas Eve alone. I told her all of it, standing at the kitchen sink with the water still running. And when I finished, Aunt Connie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Sandra needs to hear this. I said, Sandra won't hear it. She said, She will if I'm the one talking. What happened next is the part of this story that I did not plan and could not have predicted, because Connie, who is 72 years old and has spent 7 decades being the family member nobody argues with, because she's always right and everyone knows it, walked back into the dining room and asked for everyone's attention. Not loudly. She just stood at the end of the table and waited until the room quieted, which it did because Connie has that quality. She said, I'd like to talk about something before we do dessert. My mother looked up. Patricia looked up. Brent looked up from his phone. Connie said, Lily spent Christmas Eve alone in an empty house. She was there for 10 hours before Carol came to get her. And I want to know what we're going to do about the fact that this child has been an afterthought in this family for her entire life. The silence was the kind that has texture. You could feel it pressing against the walls. My mother said, Connie, this isn't the time. Connie said, Sandra, I've been waiting for the time for 8 years. I don't think the time is coming on its own. Patricia said, This isn't fair, we didn't know about Christmas Eve. And Connie said, No, because Carol has been protecting you from the consequences of your own behavior for a decade. Which was so precisely true that I felt it land in my chest like something dropped from a height. My mother started to cry. Patricia started talking about how she couldn't be expected to manage her sister's custody arrangement, and that Derek was the problem here, not the family. Brent said something about how the holidays were already stressful. I wasn't looking at any of them. I was looking at Lily, who had appeared in the doorway between the dining room and the living room. Drawn by the voices the way children are drawn by adult conflict they're not supposed to hear. And she was standing there in her Christmas sweater with the reindeer on the front that she'd picked out herself in November. And she was watching her grandmother cry and her aunt talk, and she had the careful, shuttered expression of a child who is trying to determine whether this is her fault. I stood up. I walked to her. I crouched down so I was at her eye level. Right there in the doorway with the whole family watching, and I said, "None of this is about you doing anything wrong. You know that, right?" She looked at me for a second and said, "Is Grandma crying because of me?" I said, "Grandma is crying because some true things are hard to hear." She thought about that. Then she said, "What true things?" And I said quietly, "That you deserved better than what we gave you this year. And we're going to fix that." She looked at me with those brown eyes that were her father's and she said, "Okay." In the same way she'd said it's okay that morning on the couch, except this time it meant something different. This time it meant "I believe you," which was the heaviest 2 syllables I'd ever carried. My mother called me 3 days later. Not to apologize. Not right away. My mother is not built for immediate accountability. She needs to process things through several layers of justification before she arrives at something resembling remorse. She called to talk, which is what my mother does when she's moving toward an apology and isn't there yet. She said she hadn't realized. I said she hadn't tried to realize. She said, "Carol, that's not fair." I said, "Mom, name Lily's 3 best friends." She was quiet. I said, "Name her favorite subject in school." Silence. I said, "What did she ask for Christmas this year?" "Nothing." I said, "You know Connor's travel baseball schedule for the spring. You know Chloe's recital dates through March. You have not asked me one question about Lily's life in the last year that wasn't related to logistics." My mother said, "I didn't know it was like that." I said, "I know, that's the problem." Patricia was harder. Patricia has never in her adult life been told she got something wrong without converting it immediately into a grievance. She called me a week after Christmas and told me that Aunt Connie had overstepped, that the family dinner wasn't the place, that she felt attacked in front of her children, that this was typical of me, making everything into a drama. I let her talk. When she was finished I said, "Lily sat alone on Christmas morning for 10 hours. She was 8 years old. She was afraid to call me because she didn't want to interrupt." Patricia went quiet. Then she said, "That's Derek's fault." I said yes. And after Derek made his choice, where was our family? She could have come here. She knew everyone was here. She didn't call because she didn't think she'd be wanted. Patricia said, "Of course she'd be wanted." I said, "Then why didn't she know that?" And Patricia had no answer, because there wasn't one that didn't implicate her. The shift happened slowly. Those things don't happen the way movies suggest, with one confrontation and a tearful group hug, and a new beginning. What actually happened was a series of small corrections that accumulated over 2 years into something that looked, eventually, like change. My mother started asking questions. Genuine questions, the kind that required listening to the answers. What was Lily studying? What did she like to read? Did she still want to take art classes, or had that passed? She called Lily on her birthday, not with a card in the mail 2 days late. She called, at the right time, and talked to her for 20 minutes about a book Lily was reading. And afterward Lily came to find me in the kitchen, and said, "Grandma knew about the book." With an expression of such genuine surprise that I had to turn back to the stove so she wouldn't see my face. Patricia's was harder and slower, and I won't pretend it was complete. But Connor, who is now 11 and therefore old enough to make choices that aren't just reflections of his parents, started texting Lily about a video game they both played, And that is something, even if it arrived sideways. Chloe remains Chloe. Some things take longer. Some things need the children to grow up before the damage their parents installed can be dismantled. Derek and I had the hardest conversation in February, 2 months after Christmas. Not angry, we'd moved past angry years before. Just honest. I told him what Lily had said on the couch. The part about not wanting to interrupt, about not wanting to be a problem. I watched his face while I said it, and I saw the moment it reached him. The way things reach people when the abstraction of their choices becomes a specific image of their specific child sitting alone in the dark. He didn't make excuses. He said, "I didn't understand how bad it was." I said, "I know. Neither did I. I'd been too busy managing it to see it clearly." He said, "What do we do?" I said, "We stop making her small. That's all. We just stop." He and Stephanie got engaged in April. I found out from Lily, who called me sounding cautious, feeling out whether this was information I could receive without making it complicated for her. I told her I was glad her dad was happy, and I meant it, because Lily needing to manage my feelings about her father's life was one more way she'd been made responsible for things that weren't hers to carry. Stephanie has been, from everything Lily tells me, kind in the particular, genuine way of someone who chose this situation with open eyes. The mug Lily gave Helen that Christmas, the ceramic one with the photo, is still on Helen's kitchen counter. I know because Lily told me. Some small things stay. The detail that hit hardest, the one I've thought about more than any other in the 3 years since that Christmas morning, was something Lily said to her therapist. Yes, we got her a therapist. Which was the most useful thing I've done as a parent. Something her therapist shared with my permission, because she felt I needed to hear it. Lily told her that on Christmas Eve, alone in the dark house, she had considered calling her grandmother. My mother. She'd thought about it for almost an hour, sat with her phone, looked up my mother's contact. And then she put the phone down because she was worried about making the Christmas gathering difficult. She was 8 years old. She was cold and alone and hungry, and she talked herself out of calling her grandmother. Because she'd already learned, at 8, that her needs were the kind of thing that disrupted rooms rather than moved them to action. When my mother heard that, through me, at the kitchen table on a Tuesday in March, something shifted in her face that I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, which I'd seen from her, something older and quieter. Grief, maybe, for the version of herself she thought she was and wasn't. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She just sat with it, and I let her, because that's the hard work. Sitting with the knowledge of what you've done, and I wasn't going to take it from her by filling the silence. This past Christmas, Lily was at my house. Even year, my turn, and I had her from the 23rd. My mother drove 40 minutes to deliver gifts she'd spent actual time selecting. A specific book Lily had mentioned wanting, a set of colored pencils she'd said in October she was going to get herself. A small framed print of a painting Lily had taken a photo of at a museum in October and texted me with 3 exclamation points. My mother had remembered that. She'd found it. She'd had it framed. When Lily opened it, she went very still for a second. The way children go still when something surprises them, past the point of a performance. And then she looked at my mother and said, "How did you know?" My mother said, "You told your mom, and your mom told me." Lily looked at me. I shrugged, which was true, I had mentioned it. Lily looked back at my mother and said, "Thank you, Grandma," and went back to the paper. And my mother looked at me over the top of Lily's head with an expression I didn't have a word for until later. It was the look of someone who has found, at 68, that they are capable of being better than they were, and is both relieved and heartbroken that it took this long to try. I don't have a clean ending to give you, because this isn't that kind of story. My family is still my family. Patricia still centers her children and always will. My father, who I didn't mention, because he was largely absent from all of this, in the way that certain fathers are absent, without ever leaving the building, still doesn't know what grade Lily is in. Derek is getting married in June, and Lily is going to be in the wedding, and she is genuinely happy about it. And that happiness is the truest measure of how much work everyone has done, because a child, who has been made to feel like a burden, does not volunteer to stand at the front of a room, wearing a dress, unless she believes she belongs there. Lily is 11 now. She is loud in ways she wasn't at 8. She takes up space in ways she didn't used to. She calls her grandmother with opinions about books, which is not something I could have predicted 3 years ago, and which is the best surprise I have had in recent memory. She still wraps things with too much tape. She still uses the strawberry shampoo. The ceramic mug is still on Helen's counter. The telescope Connor got that Christmas broke within a month. The sewing machine Chloe never used. The print Lily's grandmother gave her is on the wall above her desk, and she sees it every morning. And she knows someone went looking for it specifically for her. And that is the whole story of what any child needs, someone to go looking specifically for her. I paid for her therapy. I paid for mine too. I learned that managing other people's comfort at the cost of your child's sense of worth is not a sacrifice. It is a transaction. And the price is paid by the smallest person at the table. I'm done making that transaction. And I think, finally, the people who love us are beginning to understand why. If you've raised a child who learned too early how not to need things, or if you were that child, drop a comment. You know who you are. You know what it cost. And subscribe. Because next week we have a story about what happened when a woman showed up to her own mother's funeral and found out she'd been written out of the will 2 weeks earlier. That one's longer. That one's harder. And every single word of it is true.